good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Today we are having another episode of our podcast. And today again we are doing with Mercer, and the goal is to bring some of the leaders from Mercer and understand how some of the critical M&A challenges people are handling. Today we have Thomas. Thomas is one of the partner at Mercer, and primarily he is M&A and organization transformation leader, taking care for Europe market. And we are going to talk about some of the carve-out key human challenges and what opportunity we have. So topic is very interesting. I know, Thomas, I have half an hour to 40 minutes for you to, because I have long list. I'm not going to ask all the questions, but something which are very critical and important for audience, which we can surely share. So without further delay, I welcome you, Thomas, here. Maybe you can give a very short introduction, and then I will open some of the questions to you.
Thanks, Dharmendra. I mean, you've done all the work already on the introduction, right? No, but maybe just to say a little of my background. I've seen M&A from different point of view in the past 15 to 17 years. From an HR professional, from a finance point of view, as a private equity professional, as a digital entrepreneur as well. And I know you're also an entrepreneur. And in the past 10 years, I really, as an M&A consultant, really focused on people aspect, people, cultural, and organizational aspects. So that has been, 100% of my time in the past 10 years. And really, with the team in Europe, we really supported some of the larger carve-outs in Europe. And Mercer generally in the M&A practice supports about 1,200 deals per year. So hope I'm going to be able to give some practical experience there and tips.
Sure. So that is the intent today. And most of our audience have requested that we have not covered carve-out. So today I'm going to ask more question about carve-out. So my first question is, what are the key reasons for the carve-out? And once you answer that, there will be additional question on, can you identify some of the key principle and governance of any carve-out?
Okay, thanks for the question. I mean, maybe just let's start with a simple definition, right? So a carve-out is basically taking part of a whole organization or company. And basically, it's usually when you're taking part is specific assets, or it can be a portfolio of assets, or it can be an entire business unit, right? And the first thing that to consider is, why do companies do that or organizations do that? And usually because the parent organization does not think these assets, or it doesn't think that it is the best owner for these assets. And it thinks that it can better capitalize or increase the value of this business segment if it is separated from its core operations. So typically, you would see different scenarios, and I'm discussing with a lot of clients at the moment who basically are going through the separation process, but we have knowing the outcome. So they are exploring different options. But basically, the typical scenario is first exit, right? So it's a full or partial sale to other investors, and the typical one are private equity or strategic buyer. But it can be an IPO, or it can be a joint venture. The other case is usually a no exit, which is a spin-off. And in this case, it's a spin-off to the existing shareholder. And the idea is really to boost shareholder value. And we've seen in the recent past, really an increase in carve-outs, either to optimize the value, and you see a lot of multinationals doing that for certain assets that may be better valued as a standalone. Or you see, changes in the portfolio of companies because of a larger transformation, and you see a lot of industry transforming at the moment. And a typical case as well is when you want to create more cash, or you want to build more liquidity, increase your liquidity profile to repay debt and things like that. But I think you were asking about some of the key principle and governance. I think one thing that you really need to consider, and that is the driving force of carve-outs, is that it's different than standalone companies in the fact that carve-out business, as it is really dependent on the continued support from the parent company to maintain its operations. And there's a number of areas around that, but I think it's important to understand the structure because it has a lot of implication from the people and HR side. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that answers. So I think my next question is primarily on the people, because you spoke about people, and there is a big connect when either you do M&A transaction or you do even carve out. People are also part of this. So my next question to you is, what are the key people aspect that usually considered as critical factor for the success of a carve out?
Yeah, obviously it's a question that is really close to my heart. So and I think I'm quite lucky in the consulting world because there's an increasing importance of at least a consideration of the people aspects of M&A transaction, and you really see that. We've done a study recently, I think it was last year, where about half of the M&A professionals and the executives that were actually surveyed say that M&A failed primarily due to people risk. So half of M&A failing primarily due to people risk. That is quite a high number. And really, I mean, it depends really on the context of a specific M&A transaction. So the importance of these topics are going to be quite different. But if I have to maybe list a number of the critical aspects, let me start with org design, because I think that's a bit of a bolding source, and it helps understanding why a carve-out is quite different than another kind of M&A transaction. What happens is that the carve-out business usually share customers, sales teams, suppliers, can be some of the production processes, corporate functions is a usual topic. Technology it can be a real hassle, I'm sure you know. And a carve-out can drive some of the costs. And I think from a cost perspective, that's something to consider, is that you have the transformation cost, so the cost of transitioning, but there's also costs around dis-synergies. Because usually, if you're part of the parent companies, you can achieve economies of scales, and if you take in part that up, you need to stand up a number of activities as a standalone. And there's also something to consider is the stranded costs. And that's usually for the parent company, because you're taking a large portion of the business out. And I had a recent case where it was a very large carve-out, very transformational for our tech clients. And that really, the stranded cost was really an issue, right? And I think from an org design perspective, one thing to really consider and understand is the timing as well. Because a lot of the shared function, for example, are going to take time to stand up, right? So you need to consider whether you want to transition and set your day one on the basis of a TSA, so with transition service agreements, which is basically a service, a way that the parent company service the carve-out business against some cost and some transfer of money, or do you want to do a straight stand-up and be fully standalone? And that drives a lot of the activities and the timeline. And I mean, from experience there's the global consideration, and there's often a big focus on big countries, but what really needs to be considered as well as the smaller countries, because they usually need a larger transformation and a concept on their own, right? But what we've really tried to do on Mercer's side around our design is really to have more of a bottom-up approach. So really try to leverage our experience and data around understanding the talents, the skills, and what are their costs in the market, to provide some deep dives as well on top of the more top-down approach to our design that you probably know the kind of top-down that I'm mentioning, right? So that would be the first topic. And the second topic is around culture and operating environment. Now, I think here it really depends on the context. I mean, it can be more of a parent-seller topics, for example, in case of a spin-off. and can be more of a, a buyer topic in the case that, it's more about changing culture after closing. But in any case, I think it's important to detail down the strategy and the value drivers into what really is gonna change in the operating environment, right? You can call it culture, you can call it operating environment, but at the end, you really need to understand that and how this is going to drive behaviors, right? I worked, for example, on a very large global carve-outs in about 80 countries, and really we worked with them in trying to understand what would be the cultural change. It wasn't a sell directly, wasn't sure about exactly the exit options, but they really wanted to create their own culture and to send a very strong message to that, right?
Yeah.
And I think, to take another example, I've worked on a PE acquisition of a large company, large European company, Carve-out. And in this case as well, it's very clear that the culture and the operating environment that you're going to offer to the Carve-out business is going to be, to the integrated or stood up, in this case, Carve-out business is going to be very different. So there's a large transformation around that. And I think it's good to consider how these changes are going to change behavior as well. And that directly links with the change management and communication approach. And I think here there's regulatory drivers of it, obviously around labor relation, information and consultation, but you really want to go towards more best practices and really have an approach that helps people to embrace more the change than just doing the bare minimum. And I think here again with Mercer's, let's say, positioning in the market, what we really want to do is really try to leverage technology to have a more bottom-up approach,
right,
and include a broader group of stakeholders into the change management and communication approach. And I think that's something that is really close to my heart and directly linked with the topic of leadership and talents, and how you're going to transition the employees, which is also a very important topic. And I think here it's important to understand that the leadership and talent requirements inside a parent company are going to be quite different in the new carve-out setup, right? Yeah. I've worked with another company recently into a carve-out, which was in this case a smaller number of countries, but basically you had leadership that were used to the corporate world, right? They were business unit kind of responsible. Yeah. Very different than if you do a standalone and you integrate into another setup, right? So in this case, that was really something that we needed to deep dive into the requirements, and directly linked to that is how you're going to select the people into the new organization, how you're going to transition them, how you're going to retain them. Yeah. Flight risk is a big topic, right? It's driven by many aspects, but usually the carve-out business and its people would have some kind of attachment to the parent company. Right. They would be concerned about the change in their role. They would have some change resistance. They would be fearing of losing some package or some of the more comfortable situation they had. So that's also something to consider. And maybe I know, sorry, it's a bit of a long answer, but
no.
The last point is, and I think for the HR people that are listening to this podcast, is that around the HR function, right? Separation in itself. And that's a whole different world, right? The HR organization and the service delivery model as well need to be changed. There's also the topics around TSA, and there's some aspects from experience that tend to take quite a very long lead time, right? A typical one are payroll stand-up, especially if you want to go through a third-party kind of external provider. Systems in another topic that usually kind of be included in the whole TSA discussion. And then there's the whole HR programs and practices from comp and ben, terms and condition, performance management, etc. Right. Sorry, it was a long answer, but yeah, there are some of the key people risk.
Yeah, I know this is a long answer, but this is a very important point, Thomas. So in fact, my next question is primarily on, same similar kind of question, but maybe in the different context. So how to identify the key drivers leading to a successful M&A carve-out? So you spoke about, different type of carve-out, the strategy and all. But what are the key drivers which will lead to a successful M&A carve-out, in your opinion?
Okay. Well, I'll focus on what really impact the more the people aspects, but I think there's some general aspects of it that I think makes a difference, especially at the beginning, right? And some of the things that I see more often is first, try to be clear on what you want to achieve. I'm seeing so many cases where there's still so much discussion at the beginning around how we're going to add value for a carve-out, right? Because, I mean, we usually say, for example, in a PMI context or in integration context, that 1 + 1 needs to be over 2, right? From a simple math perspective. But in this case, in carve-out, you're basically saying that 10 - 1 is over 9, right? In some way. So I think that's gonna the understanding the value drivers is also gonna help you understand the strategy, right? Around, are you trying to just clone the existing organization and just copy paste what there is in place? Or how much effort you want to put around the optimization of the carve-out business, right? And again, it's coming back to what you want to achieve and what's the exit strategy, etc., right? At the end, there's no one set of driver, because from a people perspective, because that really is going to depend on the specific context. It depends on the structure, the industry, how the value is going to be added and preserved. And once you understand the deal rationale and drivers, really try to define the people strategy. So maybe just to give you a practical example, because it's a bit theoretical now, right? I had a case like that where it was a carve-out into a joint venture, right? So in this case, a lot of the effort was around, let's get it ready because we want to sell this part to the joint venture. We want to separate this part, and we're on a tight timeline. So really, the focus was around the separation and the timely separation, and then all the kind of optimization rethinking was really to be done in the joint venture. Now, I've worked on another carve-out where it was a spin-off, and the timeline was more, let's say, less compressed, but it was still challenging. But what we did is we ran 2 separate kind of projects at the same time. One was getting ready for the day one, for the separation. And at the same time, it was about, what do we want to do that is really specific to this carve-out business? What are some of the flagship change that are going to make us different from when we were in the parent companies? All these things that we always wanted to do. And that's a different approach there. I think if we look at the people drivers and generally the drivers as well that makes an M&A successful or a carve-out successful, I think there's also around understanding in detail the scope of the separation, because I think here there's often a very high level understanding of that at the beginning, but you have a lot more entanglements between the carve-out business and the parent company. And really the devil there is in the details, right? So quite often, the key worry of people, for example, on HR is my compensation package going to stay the same, right? And when you look at the details of that, you want to avoid having, leaderships making some broad, promises and things like that, because when you get into the details, sometimes you just see, okay, well, they're not going to stay in the same offices, in the same real estate. So, well, wait, there's, they can't access to the parking, they can't access to the canteen and things like that. So it may be very small impact from a financial standpoint point of view, but it has a very symbolic value for employees. And trust me, I had a case where it was about, taking out 3 oranges offered on a Christmas. and that took a whole symbolic value, right? So yeah, I think that's just something to consider. Maybe some of the ones that I can think of that came up very recently.
Yeah. So I think my next question will be also towards employees. So how important is to identify the key employee during a carve out? So during the carve out,
The key employees, you said?
yeah, key employees during the carve out.
Well, I'm not going to say it's
I
not
know
important, right?
there could be very long answer for this, but
I'm a people consultant, right?
yeah,
No, but outside of the typical kind of consultant speech, I think, it will depend on the type of carve-out that you're doing, right? There's some carve-out that are more asset-based, based on, product and patent and infrastructure, and it's going kind of very different than but I mean, nowadays, which business actually don't need the talents to actually make sure that the business actually attain full value in the market, right? And drive value in the market. We did actually a study this year where it was really targeting executives, and 89%, so nearly 90% of the executives actually say that the organization are being severely impacted and are being impacted by the loss of talent. So, major transformation like carve-outs really do increase the flight risk and the turnover, because, well, first, it's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of change, and, not everybody likes that. But also the key employees that you have and the key talents are usually the ones that are directly, have opportunities in the market, right? And are being asked, especially at the moment, the headhunter industry is really, really active in the market, right? So I actually had maybe a side note on that. I had a discussion with a global VP of talent of a company that actually was carved out from a larger company, and we were discussing on how difficult it is to find talents in the market, and he was actually saying, well, it's not only the talents for the business. I'm actually struggling to find talent acquisition specialists to actually find talent in the market, right?
Yeah.
So it's, I think it's clearly a very big topic, right? And what I've been working with my colleagues at Mercer really strongly recently is trying to get more transparency about the talents that are in the business that you're looking at, right? Either to carve out or to acquire, right? And we've done a partnership with several AI companies to really try to find this transparency, because sometimes you really have scattered information, even in a carve-out context, right? It's not only in the buy side, but sometimes you have very large population. It's very difficult because it's a lot of information that you may not have, and that's where it's really important and interesting to actually leverage this AI to actually make the right decision and build intelligence to make the right decision. So really a very important topic, I think, Dharmendra.
Yeah. So I think, as you said, that key employee during the carve-out are so important. My next question is how this talent can be retained and engaged during the carve-out process. So what are some of your experience? Maybe if you can share exactly what are the best practices people use to retain and engage them during this whole carve-out process?
Yeah, it's funny because I get this question quite often. And this week I had a number of discussion with clients and prospects, and it was really like on top of the agenda. I think, from experience, historically, companies have really looked at the top-down approach, right? And very financially led. And that has driven as well some of the topics around retention and engagement. Because I think clearly there hasn't been enough attention around retaining and engaging people. Talents nowadays, and it's not only because of COVID, you see some differences, right?
Yeah.
Talents expect something different than just being told what to do, right? And a carve-out, in some ways interpreted as being told by a parent company that you don't belong here anymore, right? You're not part of our future, and we don't know actually what your future is looking like, right? So talent really have a different mindset nowadays, and I think you need to adapt, the approach around retaining and engaging M&A talent in M&A and in carve-outs to that context. And I think, to tackle this, there's the typical financial retention. I think that's always going to be an importance, a box to be ticked in some cases, especially when people are seeing either a drop or a clear change because of a payout at close or whatever, right? When there's a change of cash flow, it's something really that you need to consider. Or if the talents are not aligned with the market, that's really something that you need to consider. But it's not enough to just throw cash at people, right?
Right.
And that's where the non-financial measures are, I think, are to be taken into consideration much more strongly, right? And there's different approach. There's the leadership approach, which tends to be more individual. So you can really look at the individual motivation and kind of set up some very individual package. And I have loads of story about that, but it's but let me just be brief on that. But there's also the collective approach, right?
Yeah.
And that's really linked to culture and change management. And what is the narrative that you are actually communicating as part of the carve-out, right? And from that, I was one topic that is really key to my heart is how transformation is being led, right? Generally. I mean, we've been working at Mercer in trying to bring a more human-centered transformation perspective, right? Nowadays, technology really allows to involve and to listen large group of employees, large group of stakeholders, and engage them in the process. And I've done, for example, a cultural transformation in a carve-out recently, where we set up regional digital focus group, and that can involve each of them up to 1,000 employees or 1,000 stakeholders simultaneously to get their point of view, to engage them in the process. And I think that makes a real difference. And there's a number of topics that I'm trying to place and get our clients to reflect on as well, right? Is what is the value proposition that you are offering to employees? The talent market is competitive, right? So if you were to if you were acquiring them from the competitors, what would you offer them, right? What is your storyline, right? And how does that match with the risk of losing them? The flight risk and their impact on the business as well, right? And then the other thing is what we've seen recently, and it's interesting, studies that are not coming from Mercer, but there have been studies around well-being of employees.
Well-being,
right? And it has been shown that M&A increased by 8% the likelihood of being diagnosed with depression, and by 5% of being admitted to the hospital. I don't exactly know all the details of that, obviously, but the idea is it has an impact on mental health. And I think this is both a risk, but also an opportunity for an employer to actually improve its brand and say what it has to say to this kind of statistics, right? So sorry, there's a lot of passion.
No, I know. I know. Because what happens generally, there was a time when we only focus on compensation, retention. Now that is just one part. There are other components of it. Either you do M&A transaction, integration, or carve-out. These are important factors. And implied factors are no more limited to your salary and compensation, but how you are adopting this implied to your organization, how there is a transition plan. I think there are a lot of points you have summarized many points, but I think these are the critical points I could hear. Okay, so now I'm moving on to my next question is, I know you gave lots of points on how to retain, how to engage the employee during the carve-out process. Now, my next question is, what are the factors for a smooth transition of the employee during M&A carve-out? So I think part of it you have already spoken. What are the key factors for a smooth transition of the employee during the carve-out process? So I know part of this you have already answered, but anything you'd like to
Okay.
add?
Well, let me maybe make it a bit shorter, this one. I think, again, there's a hard part and there's a soft part, right, to it. There's a structural part into the employment transfer, where you need IQ and experience really to well plan that and to well address that. And that's usually, there are requirements, for example, the typical transfer of undertaking TUP in Europe that drives the process. Is it terminating and rehire in other countries, or is there the individual transfer? You need some individual contracting. At the end, the structural part is usually well covered with well-experienced carve-out specialists, and with the tools that are related to that, right? And usually what we do is, you have a transition roadmap, and you know exactly what to do when, and how to identify and mitigate some of the key risks, right?
Right.
What I think is maybe has been less of an attention, which is the soft and change part, where you need emotional intelligence and the right tools to really address that, right? And that's where you need to, to have a change narrative, craft a message that is authentic. You need to be authentic in addressing what's changing for the organization, for the team, for the individuals.
Right.
And what, you definitely see what kind of question you're getting from employees when you see a carve-out, right? I'm gonna, is there some security around my employment? Am I gonna keep the same comp and bear? Am I gonna change team, change role, etc. Right? And I think here you really need to start asking yourself all the question and have the good answer is, what is it changing, and what's, why is not changing? Why are we changing that? Why are we doing this carve-out? What's the rationale? What are the things that, we need to do differently because it wasn't working that well? And, what is the risk of not changing as well, right? In a lot of cases, I don't feel this is really addressed so proactively and so well from a emotional standpoint, right?
Yeah. So, how you think that, how HR can support for a successful carve-out? How can HR, you think, that support during the carve-out process?
You mean HR as a function, right?
Yeah, HR as a function.
Okay. Well, we discussed some elements to that, and we discussed as well how much the employee experience is important, right? From a value proposition standpoint. And at the end, really, the HR function is really the backbone of the transformation, and the HR professional are really directly in the front line of employee questions and supporting manager and employee questions and addressing this. And I think the HR function has really a lot of challenges. First, because it needs to support this SMO, so the separation management office, the cross-functional separation management office, on topics like, change management, communication, org designs, employee selections, etc. But it also needs to support employees and manager in the transformation. You also need to drive the transformation of the HR function at the same time. And at the same time, still do their day-to-day jobs, right? So there's often a mismatch between the investment and the attention that it's getting, because it drives a lot, and the people risk are driving so much of the value, and the capacity and the capability of the HR function at the time to actually address these issues, right?
Right.
And I think that's where, and I help a lot of my clients in doing that, is you need to have a proactive kind of discussion between the business, corporate M&A and HR into, okay, how do we address these M&A cases? How can we best address the people topics? What do we see as the key issues in the past? What hasn't worked well? And have the same also discussion in a deal specific or specific context of a carve-out, because there's going to be difference, and really bring the right experience, resources, and the kind of support that you need to really address these topics in a carve-out situation. Yeah.
Right, right. So I come to my last question to you, Thomas, and it is primarily, my question is primarily on your experience. And can you, if you can just highlight some of the few HR best practices for a successful carve out, whatever you have experienced that, these are the best HR practices we should really follow and they are good. I know there are a long list, but if you can give us few important one which you think that's critical for the carve out success.
Yeah, this is the best practice is always a good question, right? I'd love to have like best practices that is one size fits all and it's always working. That I'm sure it would save me time in preparing for proposal. But yeah, I mean, it does depends on the context of the car. I mean, I gave you some examples and you see that the drivers are completely different. But I think there's maybe a few topics that are regular, right? Is how do you define the people strategy? And the people strategy is the people strategy for the separation. So what do what are going to be the people value drivers in the specific context of the separation? What is it going to be for the new carve-out business? And what is it going to be for the parent company? Because in some cases, actually transform the parent company as well, right? And I think, we discussed before, it's difficult to sometimes get alignment on exactly the value drivers, but you need to go a level deeper and understanding what the people aspects are, right? And I think that there is something as well that comes quite often is around, copy paste versus optimizing. And I get a lot of these questions of what should we do, right?
Right.
And where should we optimize? Where is it worth optimizing, right? I think there's a certain momentum that comes with carve-out of change, right? And often we're being asked is, why should we change, right? Are we really forced to, right?
Yeah.
I think change is coming anyway. In some cases, it's driving a lot of the costs.
Yeah.
But I think there is an interesting question to ask yourself is, why not changing?
Yeah.
Because you're changing anyway. You have the momentum. I mean, there's some changes that you have to take anyway. So why not think about the future and make this changing today or before day one or at day one, if that's reasonable, right? Obviously. And I think close to that is really understanding, putting the structure. I'm not going to go too much into details. I mean, you take the drivers, the value drivers, you understand what is the expected outcomes, you build the narratives, you build the governance, the two in a box concept, the guiding principles, you put the project plan. I mean, there's a lot to be done, but I think the governance, is important to build first guiding principles at global level that are going to drive some of the efforts going down. And I think I got this question actually recently from one of my clients is we're very decentralized, right? They are very decentralized. Why would we do global kind of guiding principles, or what do we need that? Can't they just decide everything at local level? Yeah. I'm not saying that you need to have everything, top down, global led, and local only need to implement, right? I just think that I've seen so many cases where locally something has been done, something has been promised that is just giving the wrong message and something that you can't align with in other countries, and that creates a lot of issues, right, from a people perspective. So I think at least having some global guiding principles, some general governance about the do's and don'ts really help, even if you still being very decentralized in the actual doing. And I think the last topic that is really close to my heart is around involving stakeholders. I mean, the usual consultant lingo on top of it depends is, think stakeholders, and stakeholders, right? But outside of the typical lingo, I think stakeholders at the end make or break a change, because if they don't feel involved, and both the leaders, managers, the HR professional, the talents, etc.
Yeah.
If you don't listen to them, if you don't learn from them, if you don't involve them in some of the changes,
Yeah.
well, you're giving a very different message,
Yeah.
right? And I think there's, it goes at the end, is very linked to having a more inclusive kind of leadership and transformation.
Yeah.
And I think before there were like a lot of changes in doing that, but nowadays we have the technology to do that. So why not take the opportunity? It does make a big difference, in my opinion.
Yeah. I think these are very relevant. I know your list is long, because when we ask about best practices, lesson learned, with your 200 plus transaction detail, I think you have a lot of, insight. So thanks for your time. And we'll have, so for our audience, we'll have another session very soon. In the meantime, if you'd like us to, come out with some other topic, feel free to reach out. If you'd like to know more, detail from Thomas, just reach out to him directly. And happy to have you, Thomas. Thanks for your time.